Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. This is Jeff Reichard with Veeam's product strategy team, welcoming you to another Industry Insights Live. And I'm joined today by Leah. Leah, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Troscianecki. I'm the Principal Product Marketing Manager for our Enterprise segment. And I have been a guest on this show a few times now, but I'm super excited to be joining with you guys in 2024.
So we have a great talk for you today. Leah and I are going to dig into the newly announced Veeam Data Cloud offering. And if you didn't catch that announcement, it is our first-party led Veeam Backup as a Service offering. We're going to be digging into some of the market-driven and data-driven reasons that Veeam has made this decision. And as always, we're going to be relying quite a bit on some of Veeam's own industry research. What I think we'll do to start with, Leah, is talk about the change that we've seen over the past several years in the way that we're backing up Microsoft 365 data. While we dig into that, let me encourage everybody who is watching us live, please do enter in the chat on the medium that you're watching this on, where you're joining us from, and we'll call those out. We'll populate the map the way that we usually do so that everyone can see where we have folks coming from around the world to see today's industry insights. So Leah, the numbers. If we take a look at the trends in backup of Microsoft 365 data, in the most recent Data Protection Trends Report, this is, as a reminder for everybody, research that came out in January of this year. We surveyed about 1,000 enterprises around the world. What we found is that 74% of respondents are using a third-party service to back up their Microsoft 365 data. The number below that is 41% that are relying on legal holder data protection built in to Microsoft 365, especially the E3 and E5 levels. And I'll just call out the low percentages on the bottom. Folks who are not looking for a solution, 4%. Folks who only use the recycle bin and think that's good enough, 3%. Or people who think that they don't need backups, that's down at 4%. Leah, this is not the story that we used to see. Walk us through the change we've seen here.
Definitely. So I think what was interesting about talking with organizations about their resiliency strategy for Microsoft 365 data just 3, 4, 5 years ago was that we were still making the case for backup, talking about some of the core reasons why you might need to be considering a backup solution versus using something like the recycling bin. We were still educating on the shared responsibility model in a lot of cases. And I say this to the folks on the call here today because so many of you guys are active in our community. I'm sure you've heard about shared responsibility model, 3-2-1, all of these sort of best practices that we talk about regularly in backup land. They were still not permeating the sort of consciousness of general Microsoft 365 administrators and other folks who had heavy involvement in that solution. That really has changed in the last couple of years. We're not having to make the case for. Instead, it's becoming about how do you leverage this effectively? What is most important to your organization? And part of that, I think, is because Microsoft themselves are acknowledging that it's important to have a backup strategy. Obviously, the shared responsibility model comes from cloud providers like Microsoft, but they've gone really a step further by instantiating backup of Microsoft 365 as its own category. And in fact, Microsoft just last year announced creating their own backup solution. But when we've talked with Microsoft about their decision to do that, they were really acknowledging that it's important for them to have that as an offering to catch anybody who isn't today backing up. But they still see a very strategic importance in partnering with organizations like Veeam because they recognize that Veeam is ultimately a leader in the space, and it's important for organizations to be thinking about looking at third-party experts like Veeam for their backup strategy. And Jeff, I think you've heard that as well from talking with Microsoft and talking with some of these organizations as well.
Yeah, it's completely the case. If we think about the backup market as a whole, you can back up your Linux servers, you can back up your Windows servers using NT backup, and yet surprisingly, there is in fact still a huge third-party backup market out there because the built-in utilities, while they can help you, maybe don't offer all the flexibility, all the functionality that enterprise customers around the world need. So it's not surprising that even though we now have a first-party offering from Microsoft that validates the notion you need to back up, that there's still a huge place for organizations like Veeam to add functionality to that. And, Leah, as you pointed out, we were a launch partner with the Microsoft backup service because we add value to it and use some of the new hooks for data protection that they've built in. I'm going to jump to the map real quickly, and then we'll tee up our next set of data. So if we could take a look at the map, we have folks joining right now from North America and Central America in the states of Connecticut, Ohio, and Texas. In South America, we have folks who have joined us from Brazil, and we will move on to the rest of the globe here when we take our next break and look where we have people joining from other geos. So it's often the case when organizations put backup in place that they, to use the old expression, they close the barn door after the horse is already out, right? They experience something bad and realize, wow, I wish that hadn't happened. I wish I had a backup to deal with it. Let's take a look at what we heard on the next slide when we asked the question, why exactly are you protecting Microsoft 365 data? What led you to do this? And as many of you who have seen our research in the past will be aware, we frequently ask the same question of different personas within an organization. And this one is not an exception. If you take a look, we have the dark blue bars, which represent the software as a service. In other words, your Microsoft 365 administrators in your organization. And then the green bars on the bottom represent the traditional backup admins. And we ask the same question of both those different groups. Why are you backing up the data? It's not really a surprise that the leaders and that there's a lot of coordination, there's a lot of similarity in the answers that we got for preparing against cybersecurity attacks or for compliance or regulation requirements. But those weren't the only two answers we got. And Leah, the bars look a little different for some of the lower answers. So why don't you walk us through that?
Definitely. I mentioned that those of us on the call who are hardcore in the backup community see a lot of these best practices on a regular basis that apply to any workload. Whether you're a systems administrator who has been spending their entire career in the data center, or you are moving into some of these other workloads across SaaS, containers, cloud, the best practices remain. And so we're seeing a really big disparity still between the level of knowledge and education on the workload owners themselves, the DBAs, the SaaS admins, the cloud engineers, versus those of us who spend our time on backup. There's some pretty big differences. What's really encouraging to me is that everybody is on the same page that cybersecurity threats are becoming a very real reason why we need to be making sure that there is a good backup solution there. We're also on the same page that, especially for Microsoft 365 data, compliance is at the top of mind for so many organizations. Being able to recover individual files, individual emails for things like e-discovery is, of course, a very common use case that many Microsoft 365 admins face. Where that disparity lies is in a lot of the things that we think are backup best practices. For example, you see something like, oh, I have an accidental deletion. What are the capabilities needed to recover that? Oh, I need to make sure that I'm empowering lots of different users to be able to restore. Let's make sure that there's capabilities for that. One in particular that Jeff and I have been very interested to talk about is this idea of malicious user or other internal threats. Now, Jeff, I know you spent a lot of time talking with customers, and we spent a lot of time talking about external bad actors, but sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. And I know you and I were both very surprised to see such a significant disparity between what the M365 admins reported, right? 29% of them reported that the primary reason for backing up their data was insider threats. But backup administrators recognize that at a much greater level. So I think we both found that really surprising. And it just means more important than ever that the backup community, again, our hardcore Veeam user community, continues to push these best practices out to other stakeholders within our organization, or if you are a partner, continuing to educate customers across the stack, not just centralizing that information with one individual within the organization, because when it comes to cyber threats, it has to be everybody's job. And in this particular case, I think we're seeing a big difference between understanding those best practices of external threats. Yes, we're all on the same page, but internal threats can be just as destructive.
Absolutely. And it's completely, it's a maturity issue. Something that folks who have dialed into these webinars, these live streams before have heard us talk about is that especially during and after the pandemic, there was a big focus on getting things up into cloud services to continue the mission for many organizations right now, rather than maybe doing it the right way. And so there's had to be some maturing that followed that. I was very interested along these lines. I had a public sector panel at Veeam on a couple of years ago, and I had 3 IT leaders, from CIOs from 3 different US cities, all of whom had gone enthusiastically all in for both citizen services and remote work with Microsoft 365 during the pandemic. And all of them, for reason number 2 on this list, for compliance reasons, backed up their Microsoft 365 data using Veeam, and they backed it up on-prem. Now, what we're talking about today is the Veeam Data Cloud, which backs up Microsoft 365 data into Veeam storage up in Azure. But it's important to note there are still going to be use cases where it's going to be important for folks to back up data on-prem, like these 3 cities that I talked to who felt that was their requirement, or to protect data in other ways. And we'll dig into that more in a couple of minutes when we look at some more of our stats.
Before I do that, though, I do want to talk about a specific customer success story that we wanted to highlight. When we were thinking about this topic today, one of the things we wanted to do was really let these customers tell that story for us, just like Jeff said when we were hosting that panel at Veeam On. So we went ahead and pulled a really cool story from an organization called Esquire, and they offer deposition services for legal affairs. Of course, you can imagine that regulatory compliance is extremely important as a use case. So they talk quite a bit about how Veeam has become a great partner in making sure that they meet those compliance requirements. They also talk quite a bit about their mission as an entire IT organization to thwart these kinds of cyber attacks, and how, again, Veeam has become a great partner. They really use Veeam across their entire infrastructure, Microsoft 365 in the data center, also backing up AWS workloads. So they really run the full gamut of working with us, and we wanted to take a minute to highlight that here. So if we can go ahead and roll that clip, it'll be a great way to tell the story.
Esquire's mission is to preserve and protect the sanctity of the record to ensure equal access to justice for all. From a ransomware perspective, we use Veeam to make sure that the backup and the recovery capabilities both give us that compliance level.
I had used Veeam in the past at a previous company. I knew that it had quite a few benefits that we could benefit from. One of the things that Veeam is really amazing with is that it's a kind of a set it and forget it, and it's just easy. It just works.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you could see that there's some really great stories out there. And one of the things we're so passionate about as a Veeam team is making sure that the community stays connected. I know so many other vendors don't necessarily value community efforts like industry insights, like cultivating a social community, because I just think that they're in it for the money. And I don't think that Veeam is in it for the money. We very much are passionate about keeping up with today's complications and disruptions for organizations, and highlighting stories like that hopefully validate for you how you might be feeling. You might see some best practices in those kinds of stories that make it relevant to your organization. So let us know in the chat if there's any other stories you want to hear from us. We're super happy to continue to highlight stories like this on future live streams. So let us know. But what we want to do next is talk a little bit about cloud workloads specifically. We spent quite a bit of time talking about Microsoft 365 workloads and how there's a really big disparity in the personas understanding of why you might need to back up M365 workloads. We actually see similar discrepancies on the Azure side, which is kind of surprising because both groups tend to manage infrastructure. It may be understandable that an app owner doesn't understand the intricacies of infrastructure management. But on the Azure side specifically, what's been very encouraging is we're seeing so many more organizations recognizing that they need to back up these workloads. So if we take a look at some of the data, you'll see specifically that we're highlighting data about file shares in Azure and databases. I wanted to highlight this because we see the same thing on VMs when we ran these questions. But what's really encouraging is that organizations more and more are recognizing that for databases, for file shares, workloads that sometimes get left off the wagon, so to speak, of a backup policy, that more and more these organizations are valuing backing up this data. So again, it becomes less about educating on the shared responsibility model and more about making sure that we're all working together as an IT team to highlight some of these plausible emergencies and things that us as backup owners know all too well, and making sure that the cloud workloads teams understand that a little bit better. Jeff, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's very heartening to see that after laboring in the wilderness and talking with people about the shared responsibility model for years, organizations are getting it. And it's not just the backup admins who are realizing, hey, bad things happen to your data and you need to protect it. But now it's more generally in the organization. Unfortunately, I do think in many cases it's because folks have been burned, because they've lost production data and they've realized that their SLA with their cloud provider covers downtime, but it doesn't cover data loss, which is, by the way, universally the case. So it is really heartening to see that we've got the same trend going for other Azure platform services as we're seeing for Microsoft 365.
And I think part of what that kind of the impetus then becomes is when something bad happens, that tough lesson is learned. What are we going to do about it? And more, I think we're seeing a new trend around backup as a service. So of course, we have partnered with cloud and managed service providers for nearly the entirety of Veeam's history. I actually previously come from our service provider segment and worked very closely with organizations around the world providing cloud hosting, backup as a service to the cloud, disaster recovery as a service to and from the cloud, as well as managed backup services for on-premises, cloud-based, and SaaS workloads. So we've always been seeing this for a long time, and it's been a very important part of Veeam's go-to-market. But I think what we're seeing now is that over the last couple of years, the desire to offload some or all of the data protection duties to experts is becoming an imperative. You'll see that 88% of organizations say that it is very likely that they are using BaaS or DRaaS on their servers. And again, that could be an on-premises server or a cloud-based workload. You'll see similar metrics on Microsoft 365 workloads. And I think a big reason for that is it's becoming harder and harder to prepare for what bad things can happen, right? In 15, 20 years ago, so much of what we talked about with backup was infrastructure failure, some sort of natural disaster, the network went down. And these are things that on a day-to-day basis, infrastructure teams are managing and trying to stay ahead of. What's becoming harder is staying ahead of these bad actors. And I think that's becoming a really big imperative and why so many organizations are looking to leverage the best practices from experts. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit more about this, of why we're seeing such a heightened sense of wanting to partner more with a heavier hand?
It's absolutely the case. Veeam has had a strong partner community for many years, over 10,000 active service providers and partners worldwide. But the fact is, even though, as Leah said earlier, we have a mission here at Veeam, we care deeply about protecting data and making sure that people stay up and running. No one in most organizations wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go to work and run a really good backup today. And if I do that, that'll be a success. I'll run a backup. You have to do it. It's more critical than ever because of cyber threats, because of compliance, because organizations' environments are more complicated than they used to be. But especially as you move to offload things that are not the core mission of your organization, like running IT infrastructure and running services to other people, to third parties who do it well and do it efficiently, why wouldn't you offload backup to third parties for that data too? And so, as Leah mentioned, we're now up to 7 out of 8 folks saying that we are very likely to, or almost certain to, offload backup for our on-prem workloads, for our cloud workloads, to an expert service provider. And honestly, this is just continuing a trend that has been marching very steadily for the past several years in these responses. It's not a surprise. And of course, the theme of today is our new Veeam Data Cloud offering, and it ties in directly to why Veeam has rolled out this first-party data protection as a service offering.
Definitely. And, Jeff mentioned earlier talking with some customers that are in the public sector space, and they specifically chose to back up on premises for compliance reasons. So I think that it's important to kind of put out there that Veeam still sees the freedom of choice as one of the most important disciplines that we can have in our go-to-market. And it is a discipline because it would be easy for us to just flip the switch and say, oh, now we're SaaS-based and we're going to be prescriptive, right? With how you engage with services, with how you engage with cloud hosting. What's unique about Veeam is that we recognize and listen to organizations who want to be able to choose how they leverage backup, right? And I think that's going to continue to be very important for us moving forward. But what we started hearing from organizations over the last couple of years was, you have a gap. Yes, I want the freedom to choose to back up on premises, to manage this myself, to perhaps have a subject matter expert in my organization who knows that accidental deletion and orchestrating of data is important. But I want to be able to empower bigger teams, and I want to leverage the best practices encapsulated in one place. And that place is Veeam, right? At this point, Veeam has a sort of cachet in the market as being an industry leader and ultimately a partner in data resiliency. So one of the things we did is we, as kind of a practice at Veeam, we continue to partner with third-party survey organizations to be able to learn more about what organizations are looking for. Now, of course, we do lots of things with the Veeam community. We talk with you guys regularly on live streams like this. We are active in customer advisory councils. Going to events, of course, is really important for us, and hearing boots on the ground what you're facing, what challenges you're trying to go through. But we also want to get a sort of outside perspective out of the Veeam community. What are organizations facing? So when you're seeing data like this on Industry Insights, you're actually getting third-party data. This is data that, good, bad, or ugly, Veeam is getting from an outside firm to be able to better understand the challenges that organizations are facing. And what we've heard loud and clear over the last few years is that more and more organizations want to see Veeam offering an as-a-service option. And again, option's important because at the end of the day, it is about that freedom of choice, but we were avoiding the choice of a Veeam offered as a service solution. So let's talk a little bit about what this data is telling us. At a high level, you're going to see some table stakes discussions about what does backup as a service mean to you. I think Jeff and I are sort of like, duh, on a couple of things here, right? Yes, backup as a service should have cloud as a major component. Yes, it should be a web-based UI. Yes, it should be subscription. These are sort of staples of software as a service as a category. But what has changed over the last couple of years, and you'll see here a mix of surveys that we've done between 2021 and 2023, specifically asking what is the most common aspect of backup as a service. And that has changed. Back in 2021, very few organizations said, oh, BaaS should come from the backup vendor. And that's what we mean by first party. The backup software vendor, being the first party, should be offering as a service. That was very low. on the list. It was just above an alternative to tape in our data protection trends for 2021 survey. And what has changed now all the way to 2023 is that it is the second most important characteristic of a backup as a service option in just 2 years. And Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about why we think that signal has come through loud and clear?
Well, so at Veeam, we've heard from both customers, large and small, and from our partners who resell Veeam services, that when a partner is evaluating, especially in the cybersecurity environment nowadays, the flavor of Veeam services that they want to offer, a lot of times they don't have time to evaluate 3 or 4 or 10 different service providers who offer Veeam as part of their portfolio. What they want to do is come directly to Veeam and say, look, I don't have time, I don't have resources to evaluate a number of other third parties. Show me what you have that you can provide. And we hear the same thing, frankly, from large customers. Choice is good, except when it's not good, right? Sometimes people don't want to have to go out and evaluate 10 or 11 other vendors out there that work with Veeam. They want to just go to Veeam and say, okay, what do you have? Now, on the other hand, there are still use cases, and Leah, we talked before about our public sector customers here in the US. There are still use cases where not going with a first-party backup from Veeam is going to be a valid choice going forward. And we talked before the broadcast about a couple of those. Do you want to elaborate on those?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when it comes to things like data sovereignty, or having more customization and choice in the deployment model, being able to cover lots of different white glove services, Veeam simply can't scale to that level, right? We simply cannot provide a high quality service for every single use case. So that is why it's going to continue to be so important that we work with managed service providers and cloud service providers around the world to be able to meet customers where they are and get them the exact solution that they're looking for. What we're excited about with Veeam Data Cloud, though, is a very bombastic, here is our core solution in Veeam Data Cloud, right? Here is exactly what you're getting. It's not something that you have to shop around for. This is the baseline. Then you can say, oh, okay, if that doesn't necessarily meet my needs, if I want to be able to back up on premises still, if I want to not put it in Azure for sovereignty reasons, I want to put it somewhere else, I can still go find a partner to do that. So there will continue to be lots of great opportunities for our service provider community to engage with BaaS for M365, for Azure. Certainly, we hope future workloads too. But what this does for us now is that it gives us control of a dedicated software as a service stack. This means that we can show you what a web-based UI for backup as a service with Veeam can look like. We can tell you exactly what that pricing will look like. We will show you exactly how you can reduce your on-premises hardware spend by putting something in the Azure cloud. And specifically with M365, storage is included in the cost. You're getting that predictability of spend, which, as we talk with organizations looking at their cloud investments, is becoming the #1 biggest pain point, right? It's basically, how do I thwart cyber attacks? And how do I control my costs, or at the very least predict them? Because we're getting skyrocketing hardware, networking, API costs that all come from cloud hosting and management. So there's lots of really great things that we can talk about here with backup as a service, and we'd love to hear more from you in the community. Let us know in the chat. What does BaaS mean to you? What are you excited about with Veeam Data Cloud? Where are the gaps still that you're seeing, especially for those of you who are partners that talk with a lot of customers regularly? What could we be thinking about and doing as we're breaking into this new as a service space, really emboldened by Veeam specifically? So let us know in the chat what you're thinking about with backup as a service. But with that, I think we want to go ahead and wrap a little bit today and talk more about other options that you have to interact with Veeam. So on Thursday, March 28th, we will have our Tech Bites segment. This is where we get deeper into the tech specifically, and we are celebrating World Backup Day. So I've talked a lot about our hardcore backup community and how you guys are becoming that best practices holder within your organization. This is a great day to celebrate you guys and talk more about a lot of the things that we're going on in our industry and what we're facing today. On April 2nd, we're going to continue that conversation with Industry Insights, talking about the worst backup you've ever had. And we actually sourced a couple of stories from our community. So thank you guys so much for sending entries in. And we're very excited to talk about some of these big, massive oops that we've been hearing from the space. And there's certainly some really great stories out there. Now, those are all live streams. If you want to go ahead and check out some videos from us on demand, check out our Veeam YouTube channel. There are industry insights and tech bites hosted there. There's also lots of demos, whiteboards, lots of interviews with customers. Again, this is a great opportunity for you to just kind of get some spark and inspiration and things to be thinking about, because so much of backup is that daily practice. It's not necessarily what we all wake up and want to do, but it's a great opportunity for us to be shoring up those best practices and making sure that we can keep our businesses up and running. But of course, all of that is still virtual. If you want to meet us in person, join us at VeeamOn 2024. It will be hosted in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at a beautiful resort. So if you're looking to get some sun, get some FaceTime, interact with the best of the best, we invite you to join us at VeeamOn. You can register online at veeam.com with the promo code LIVE, and that will get you a 10% discount on your passes. With that, Jeff and I thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to chatting with you guys on the next live stream. Thanks everyone.
Thanks all.